extraordinary outreach that you all have done to make sure it's as inclusive a community process as possible, especially challenging during a pandemic. And I think the proof of that commitment to engagement has really been the high numbers of Arlingtonians who've made their voices heard through the survey, through other mechanisms you all have developed. And I know that it's going to help this group reach a better conclusion and a better recommendation to my colleagues and me on the county board, and ultimately to whatever form of state government is most likely to enable us to move forward with a new name for Lee Highway, whether that's the CTB, the General Assembly, a regional coalition, all of the above. We're at the ready to work this through, and we really appreciate your great work in getting a sense of the community and thinking about the future of Lee Highway and collaborating with one another. So thanks, and really glad.
Well, thank you, Katie. Really appreciate your words, and I think we're ready to get started. So Maya, if you want to pull up the presentation.
Sorry, just a moment. I'm having some technical difficulties, so give me 20 seconds.
Problem. All right, let's get started. All right, next slide. All right, well, again, welcome everyone to the fourth working group on renaming Lee Highway meeting. Just go through the agenda real quickly. So again, welcome. Looking forward to having this meeting with you tonight. We're going to first talk about the community engagement update we've gone through since the last time we met, I believe on October 23rd. Then we'll get an update from Chris Fornash, who leads the Transportation Advisory Group. We had a meeting with them a week or two ago. Then we'll have an update from Matt Rowan from Dominion Electric Supply to give everyone an update on the Business and Property Owners Advisory Group meeting we had about 3 weeks ago. Then we're going to give you a little bit of update on the background for a few names. We did a little bit of historical research on some of these names, which answered some questions, but also raised some others, and we would like to get your feedback on those. Then we will go over the polling results, both for student polling and the public polling, which concluded yesterday, or 2 days ago. And then we're gonna have discussion about the ballot. So as you all know, we are having our final meeting a week from today. The reason we split up this final meeting is because we have some actual substantive decisions to make about what is gonna be on the ballot, whether it's a full name or just the last name, whether we're gonna call the list at all from 20 to the 10, and then finally what the street typology would be for each of the final names. So we really needed to set aside time to go through those questions with you tonight before we could vote and set up the ranked choice ballot. And then we'll open up to discussion at the end. If you all want to talk about the final names, what your thoughts are on them, what you like, what you don't like, anything, it'll be an open discussion. And just to flag for you, at the final meeting we have a week from tonight, we're going to ask each of you to spend 2 minutes talking about the names you like, what your thoughts are, what the process meant to you, that sort of thing. So just want to give you a heads up so you have time to prepare for a week from tonight. Then we'll adjourn at 8:30. Next slide. So first thing we want to do tonight is adopt the meeting minutes from last time. Ginger sent out the meeting minutes a few days ago, and then an update based on some feedback, I believe yesterday or today. So I'm looking for a motion to adopt the October, correct me if I'm wrong, 23rd meeting minutes.
So moved.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those,
Aye.
all those opposed? All those opposed? Hearing none. Any abstentions? Hearing none. Okay, and then I already talked about the December 9th meeting, which is solely going to be devoted towards voting. We're talking about the names, then voting. That's it. Next slide. All right, so giving an update on the community engagement efforts we all have made in the last month and a half. First of all, I want to thank you all for the work you've done getting the word out about the public poll and about the process. We'll talk about it later, but we had a very, very large response to the public poll, over 3,500 responses in the span of about 6 weeks, which I think is pretty significant. And I think a lot of that goes towards the work you all have done. So we sent postcards to about 8,000 households that live along the corridor. We did some news, we had some interviews on local news stations and local news media, including DCist, WTOP, RL Now, and localdmv.com. We were interviewed for the Arlington for Justice podcast. The Peach Jar flyer was put together in English and Spanish and sent to around 8,000 Arlington families. We had a Spanish language webpage. The Lee Highway Alliance undertook some social media efforts on Facebook, Twitter, and also through the newsletter. And then we put together some newsletters, the Little Ambassadors Academy, the League of Women Voters, Rock Spring United Church of Christ, the St. Mary's Episcopal, Unitarian Universalists, and St. Andrew's Church all mentioned the public polling process in their newsletters. And then we put posters in the windows of businesses along the corridor, letting them know about the process in the public poll. All right, next slide. All right, so with that, I will kick it over to Chris Fornash to give us an update on the Transportation Advisory Group.
Hey folks, this is Chris Fornash. I'm a transportation planning professional with the firm Nelson Nygaard and also a resident for 23 years of the Lee Highway Corridor, the Old Dominion Citizens Association, and I'm chairing the Transportation Advisory Group to this work group. As Matt noted, we met on Wednesday, November 18th to discuss essentially the technical transportation issues around the renaming. They're quite limited, as you know, from your previous discussions. We really identified two, and those are both related to the fact that Lee Highway and Old Dominion, there's some confusion in the general public and some naming idiosyncrasies and numbering idiosyncrasies in the section between 5 Points and Lee Heights, and I'll flip to a map in just a second. But the upshot of our discussion on the 18th was that we need to have a somewhat separate process to rename the section of Lee Highway that some refer to as Old Lee Highway, that is roughly parallel to Old Dominion Drive between 5 Points and Lee Heights. And our recommendation to you is that that process be conducted through the existing Lee Highway Alliance Transportation Advisory Group, and not that it be added to your specific charter. Next slide, please. So this is just an annotated map to show you exactly where we're talking about. I'm sure you're mostly picturing it already, but just to be clear, Lee Highway, which of course in Arlington extends from Roslyn to East Falls Church as US 29, in the section between Cherrydale and 5 Points and Lee Heights on the border of the Waverly Hills, Old Dominion and Donaldson Run Citizens Civic Associations. Route 29 is called Old Dominion Drive, and Virginia 309 is called Lee Highway. And then at the complicated intersection at Lee Heights, right by my house, the names switch, and US 29 follows Lee Highway to the west, and Virginia 309 follows Old Dominion Drive to the northwest to McLean. The county and VDOT, and I don't want to attribute this because it's an idea we rejected, but that we discussed with them in our work group meeting the idea of simply flipping the names and naming the current section of Old Lee Highway / Lee Highway in this section, naming it Old Dominion Drive. We rejected that for reasons that are probably obvious to all of you, which is that would be tremendously confusing to everyone. Why would we reuse a section of road, reuse the rejected name of a section of road that's a block away, change addresses, and possibly create a bunch of unnecessary confusion? So it's possible that the Lee Highway Transportation Advisory Group will want to include the name Old Dominion in their choice set for the subsequent process. We would advise that not to happen. We didn't offer any candidate names for that forthcoming process, just that as I noted, the Lee Highway Alliance Standing Transportation Advisory Group would handle that going forward with some special outreach to neighbors along that segment, since it's not really an issue that pertains to the whole corridor. That's a basic summary of that issue. If folks have any questions, I'm happy to discuss it, but that's what we got.
Well, thanks, Chris. Well, I'll open up to questions if anyone in the working group has questions for Chris. I can't see anyone because there's a screen share. So I don't know, raise your hand and Maya will call on.
I see Jim Todd raising a hand.
I'll just comment that I worked with Chris on this draft process, and I'll just comment that I think that since we've come up with so many wonderful potential names for renaming US 29 Lee Highway, that anything that we don't end up using or recommending to the county for renaming Route 29, I think would all be strong candidates for renaming this section. I just wanted everyone to be aware of that because I like so many of the names that we have narrowed our list down to.
And I'll pass on what was just a half humorous intent suggestion to the advisory or the transportation advisory group to you all, which is La Union Street to celebrate one of the few corner stores in Arlington. But again, that's I may not be a part of that process, so that idea may sit right here. Any other questions? I didn't see any other hands.
All right, well, thanks, Chris, for that update. It's very helpful, and I guess stay tuned, and we'll have a separate process through the Lee Highway Alliance Transportation Committee later. All right, next slide. All right, so next we'll move on and have Matt Rowan give us an update on the Business and Property Owners Advisory Group meeting we had a few weeks ago. Matt?
Thanks, Matt. So the one big kind of like blanket statement is there was a lot of pragmatism that we were hearing from the group. The first of which was, the name itself must be easy to spell and pronounce. We know that we're going to have a lot of users using it who have differing levels of command of the English language and lots of different accents. So I think easy to spell and pronounce are going to be a big part of things, including both the first and the last name. Depending on the actual ones that we're considering, it may end up being too long. We know we have to be sensitive to the idea of keeping things fairly short and concise, particularly when we are looking at easy to spell and pronounce. Easy to use in advertising, and something that's fairly memorable and compelling. They were looking at things like Main Street, Dogwood, Langston, and John Glenn as being fairly simple and straightforward to use, and things that would be easily memorable because they are attached to something that is a little bit more concrete. The name should not be easily confused with another name. There is Arcova and Alcova off the pike near Glebe, things like that. So we did want to make sure that it was fairly distinct so that there would not be confusion, particularly if we're dealing with phone directions and folks who are not used to this area. Sense of place and legacy was also very important. I think we did want to make sure that there was some sort of a sense of the place that we were looking at and the legacy of the particular locale in which the businesses were located. We did want to make sure that things felt fairly distinct, or that the name itself had some sense of actual place. You could get a picture of it in your head. We did like the idea of using historical names. That was definitely something that we were very kind of responsive to. I think when you look at the terms timeless, serious, not sound made up, and not too controversial, when we were talking about the idea of things not necessarily being serious, it was things that sounded a little too, people were using the term cute. And again, not necessarily reflective of the opinions of the business owners, but certainly reflective of some of the comments that they received in the space. So if things seem maybe a little too much like catchphrases, that was something that they wanted to be fairly sensitive to. And then when we were talking about things like controversial, as much as words like justice may seem uncontroversial, something that folks can agree to, it could be something that could necessarily stir up sort of strong opinions on one side or the other, and not necessarily the more overwhelming positive impressions that we wanted. There were some comments regarding business costs that we do also want to just bring up. There's a lot of stuff that does get associated with that. So that was one of those pragmatic things that folks were bringing up in regards to some of the names and the name changes. Nothing too overwhelming, but some of the stuff that we might expect to hear from the group. And that is kind of it.
All right. Well, thanks for the update, Matt. I guess we'll open up for questions if anyone has any questions for Matt. All right. Well, I guess hearing none, we'll move on. Well, thanks again for the update, Matt. I agree it was a very productive meeting, and really thank you for your feedback. And I thought the advice from the group was spot on.
Terrific. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thank you. All right. Next slide. All right. So with this, I'll kick it over to Ginger Brown because Ginger's done quite a bit of work on some of the background for some of these names, and we've found out some information in the intervening 5 or 6 weeks since we last met. So Ginger, you want to give an update?
Sure. So as you all know, we're going to be producing a document, a justification document to give to the county board with our final names. And so we wanted to go ahead and get a start on that. And we've been researching many of the names. And as you're aware, one of the names that we were not sure about was Nicostan. And for the process, we reached out to HALRB staff. We also reached out to the lead curator at the Museum of the American Indian, who referred us to the preeminent expert on Native American tribes in Virginia, Dr. Helen Roundtree. We went back and forth on was there another, were there options? And basically it comes down to the fact that Nicostan is not accurate, that it is not, it was overwhelmingly Arlington was a hunting ground for numerous tribes. And also that because the vast majority of the Native people were originally lived in the DC area, fell victim to introduced epidemic diseases and moved out of the area in the 1600s. Information on them isn't very clear. But what is clear, according to the experts, that Nicostan isn't accurate for us. So it would not be appropriate for us to use Nicostan. And we went around on what names might take that place. The one name that was suggested, but again, there was caveats, was Dogue, which rhymes with rogue. But given all of the question marks surrounding the name, I think it would be our recommendation to drop Nicostan from the list, unfortunately. But as far as the name goes, Nicostan probably was, did come from Anacostia, or the actual name, but it's still not relevant to Arlington. And also, we also, when we were researching a little more, it turns out that Maggie Walker, there's actually a Walker Street, a Robert Walker Street in Arlington. And so we wanted to, given that our rules were not to have any streets that were similar to other streets in Arlington, that we needed to run it by you, whether it should be taken out of the voting. So those are the two sort of questions I wanted to run by everyone and make sure that before we move on, whether we remove those from the consideration.
All right, so I'll open it up at this point. If anyone wants to talk about that, again, the questions on the table are, do we remove Nicostan and Maggie Walker from the final list of names that we'll vote on next week?
Are we discussing or voting?
Discussing.
Discussing, and then we'll either take an informal vote or a formal vote, depending on which way the discussion is going.
This is Sandra, and I think Ginger's given us enough justification to remove them from the list.
I agree. I agree too. I agree with Sandra.
I agree.
I agree.
So do I.
All right, well, any other thoughts before we agree to do that?
No. No,
all right.
not from me.
All right, well, sounds like we'll remove Nicostin and Maggie Walker from the final list before we vote next week. All right, well, I guess moving on then. Next slide. All right, so we conducted 2 public polls, as you all know. The first one is with Lee Highway students at local elementary, middle schools, and high schools. 191 filled out the poll. And as you can see, Dogwood came out first, Main Street second, Greenway third, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but those are the results from the students along the corridor. And then the second poll we had, next slide, was the public poll. 3,394 people filled out the poll, 46 called in, 15 sent messages. The results were Loving came in first, Main Street second, Dogwood third, Alcova fourth, Langston fifth, John Glenn sixth, Nicostin seventh, Ella Baker 8, Maggie Walker 9, Edward Morton 10, James Brown 11, Greenway 12, Justice 13, Unity 14, Doc Muse 15, Harmony 16, Innovation 17, Community 18, Equity 19, and Inclusive 20. And just as a reminder, this public poll was really designed to give you additional feedback and input points to consider when you all vote next week. It's not determinative, but obviously some people will weigh the public poll more than others, but really this is just additional information for you to consider. And I was very pleased to see we had such a substantial response in the last 6 weeks. And I think, again, a lot of credit goes to you all and the work you've done to help get the word out. All right, next slide. All right, so we're preparing the ballot for next week's vote. And there are 3 issues we have to decide tonight. We'd like to get your feedback on so we can finalize the ballot. The first is, do we reduce the list from the top 20 to the top 10? The second is, do we use the full name or the last name for signage purposes? And then choose the street typology for the final 10 or 20 names that we'll be voting on. All right, moving on, next slide. All right, so should the list be reduced from the top 10, reduced to the top 10 from public polling? So as you can see, we have 20 names here. This includes Nicostin and Maggie Walker, so really we have 18. So the question is, do we cut the list down from 18 to 10? And the thinking behind this, and again, open to the working group suggestions here, is you can see a fairly substantial drop-off once you get past the first 10 names. And we do, while the public poll is not conclusive, it's not determinative, we do think that the public clearly showed that some of the names towards the end of the list did not get a lot of broad support. And potentially for those reasons, might want to cut the list down to 10. But with that, I'm happy to open it up and have any feedback from the working group on how you want to handle this.
I would say, just based on, in addition to the quantifiable reason to drop the top 10, we also have the report from the business owners and property owners, stakeholders along the corridor, who are saying, I heard that loud and clear, even though we didn't hear any specifics. What I heard is some of those terms that are all grouped at the end: community, innovative, inclusive, equity, unity, even just feel a little too, I think the word was cute. And that would just be, in my opinion, another reason to drop them.
I'm raising my hand, but I don't think anyone's seeing me raise my hand. It's Jim. I think that, again, I wondered before and actually raised my hand before. I don't think anyone saw it. If we could hear a little more detail from the business community, because we only got hints, but I noticed that Arcova is number 4 on the public polling list. And I was wondering if we should also strike that, and then we would take, I guess, the top 13, which ironically puts Justice in the running, maybe, which I guess the business community didn't like. But since Arcova does seem to, I mean, I think I instantly agree with the suggestion that it could. So I just wanted to
I think you're breaking up a little bit there, Jim, but I think we got I think we heard what you were saying. So I don't know, Matt, do you want to jump in and weigh in a little bit more about what Jim was talking about?
Sure. And I think, you know, what just to clarify some of the things when we were talking about I think the composite name of Arcoba, I think that was something that could be misspelled. And we obviously know the reasons behind kind of striking Nikostin, which, you know, aside from the historical stuff, was definitely one of those things that was seen as difficult to spell and or pronounce. And the Arcoba, there was kind of that duplication of potentially another local address. I think justice, unity, harmony, innovative, community, equity, and inclusive. I think those were really the ones that kind of fell in the category of quote unquote cute. Not necessarily as much as they might be, you know, cute in the way that we think about it, but as much as they might be seem kind of like taglines or things that are more as kind of descriptors or catchphrases than actual names that would have a little bit more legs to them, something that would last a little while longer, as opposed to seeming as if they came up in a certain decade or a particular cultural moment. Not that the cultural moments aren't important, but I think it was one of those things that that was definitely mentioned by the group. So hopefully that kind of clears things up a little bit. There was you know, there's some great support behind things like Main Street, Dogwood, those sorts of things. Things that had a little bit more of a sense of specific place, whereas terms like justice, unity are more umbrella and could really be in almost any locale. Does that kind of answer the questions, Jim?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I had one other quick question, I think probably for Matt or whoever put this slide together. Does this polling include the school students, or is this only the non-school student public polling totals?
It's just the public polling, so the non-students.
Okay, so could we see a slide? Has anyone figured out when you add the student voting in what if the top 10 changes? Because otherwise it seems like we're entirely disregarding the student input.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If we, you know, we can't do it here, obviously, but if we could maybe send that out as an email. I have a few comments to make. Is this?
Yeah, go ahead. No, I agree. I think before the next meeting, we can do that. So before you vote, and you can see the public/student polling combined before you vote next week.
So I advocate for keeping all 18 names. I really respect the polling and the business community report. I think they were both helpful and informative. But Matt, I think you used a really good word, that these are not determinative. This is just informing us of you know, what was selected in a poll. One of the benefits of using ranked choice voting is that it is really made up for situations like this, where we'll have 18 choices. I don't know if there's really a benefit in culling the list right here. I think it's more beneficial to vote all 18 in next week. If we did first past the post, we could have some issues with things that are very similar, like concepts, diluting, and then the other, it could just be a kind of a mess if we did first past the post. But because we're going to use ranked choice voting, it helps us to come to a solution that the majority will support.
Matt?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, question. I think it's interesting to note, can we go back, not so much to counter what Matt said, but just to look at what the students, because I saw something here. Can we go back to the student slide for a second? So to Matt's point, where he was talking about the business community, right? Where you talk about justice, unity, harmony, those words. It's interesting to see how our future, right? The students, how they view those words, those names, and where they fall out. And even though it's a small poll sample, right? But it says a lot. So I really believe we need to look at to what I think Mike said, leave all 18 of them up and just go from there. That would be my take on it.
Hi, this is Wilma, and I want to take an opposite viewpoint. I would prefer to knock it down to 10, but I understand that everybody's got their own perspective. But that's what I think. You know, taking out the Arcova and the Neo Costin and the Walker, I think we take the top 10 off the public. But if others feel differently, we're open to discussion.
Mm-hmm. Could I speak, Matt?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I think supporting what Wilma's saying, I see both sides, and there probably would be some. I see the benefit in a way in leaving all 18, especially because the student polling was quite different from the public polling. But I also think that that will be taken into account if we're able to combine the two pollings, and I think that will give us a sense of where the students are as part of the wider community. My preference would have been to reduce it to 10 at the most, and to take out, I think we all agreed on taking out probably Arcova and Nicostin. Having heard what the business community is saying about the other names that sound cute, like Equity and et cetera, I would also like them to be taken down from there. I also think that there's an advantage in reducing it because it forces us to somehow concentrate and pay more attention to the names that we are actually going to end up using. So that would be my opinion. But yeah, I think it's useful to discuss it and come to different to see what all the different opinions are on this.
Well, and then Diane, can I add, Matt, that the difference in the numbers of people polled in these two polls is kind of dramatic. 191, I don't know if that was just one school, and 3,394. So they are not coming up with different names. They are simply weighing them differently. But I think leaving 18 is going to make next week very difficult, but make choices for others after that even more difficult.
Mr. Chairman, a quick word. This is Richard. No, I agree with those. I think as part of the job that we're here to do as a working group, I think our job is to continue to work and to narrow down our choices. I do appreciate the student polling. The sample size was not large enough, and I don't think the effect is going to be as traumatic as we think in changing votes. I think it should be incorporated, but I don't think that should stop this process from moving forward. And I think we need to continue to move forward. I think we need to narrow down our choices and then come up with our set of choices next, or our top, whatever it is, 5 choices next week.
So this was one middle school's votes, not a series of middle schools?
It was 3 middle schools, but it was whatever classes wanted to do it. So it was a mix of Swanson, Williamsburg, and Worthingham and Swanson were the 2 middle schools that we worked with, but I believe they shared it with Williamsburg.
Matt?
They're not very representative of the county.
I think I heard Sandy. Yep.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a point of fact because Dogwood is coming up number 3 in the public polling. And as Jim mentioned at the last meeting, the state tree is dying. We did check on that with landscape architects. And it is not an urban tree, so it could not be planted along the Lee Highway corridor. So if people are thinking about it as a way of identifying a place, that probably will not happen. So I just wanted to say that as a point of fact.
So there is a corporations plant something called I don't like the name, but it's called a Korean dogwood. It blooms after it's come into leaf in late May, whereas dogwoods normally bloom right after the cherry blossoms in early to mid-April. It looks very different. It grows very different, and it's not salt tolerant tree, so it also could not be planted along the Lee Highway corridor.
Right.
I'd also like to make a few comments about did we decide earlier in an earlier meeting about the process of what we're going to do at this meeting, what we're going to do at next meeting? Because I thought we did decide that we would have 20 and then we would vote to bring it down. I understand we need to adjust every now and then, but that is a little bit different than what we decided earlier.
Yeah, so the reason we end up splitting, what tonight was supposed to be the final meeting, we ended up splitting, is obviously there's a lot to discuss tonight. And, we kind of realized when we were going through the process that, it would be hard the steering committee couldn't make these decisions on their own, obviously, but we discovered some of these issues and questions came up when we were putting together the presentation. So I agree. I think there was some flexibility built into the framework for this working group, which is why we had the possibility for a fourth meeting, and it's why we're discussing these issues with you tonight. Well, it sounds to me like people are fairly divided on this, so I suggest that we have a vote, and the question would be whether we have the final ballot have 18 names or 10
17 names, I think, Matt.
Well, we said Nick Austin and Maggie Walker, and some other people suggested Arcova, but I don't know if that was a widely held opinion among the group. I'm willing to hear people out.
Well, I'll just try. I move to strike Arcova as well.
Second.
Second.
Yeah.
Second.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agree.
All right, so do we have anyone who disagrees before, so we can have, if we all agree by voice vote, that's fine, but does anyone disagree about keeping Arcova on? Or taking Arcova off, sorry. All right, well, hearing none then, I guess we'll remove Arcova, Nick Austin, and Maggie Walker, which means there's 17 final names. And the question for you all is, are we going to have 17 names on the ballot or 10? And with that, please put your vote in the chat.
Before we vote, I just want to make a note that as people have been speaking, I've been adding up the middle school votes to the main votes, and it almost barely changes the outcome. Maybe one or two moves slightly, but overall, it has no impact.
And also, before we vote, can I ask, it's Mike Hogan, Sandy, are you suggesting that Dogwood also not be considered?
I mean, I think that would be my suggestion, but of course it did get a lot of votes, so I don't know. But it'll never be a way to identify the Lee corridor. It's not possible from a landscape architectural perspective.
I agree with that, or recognize the horticultural reality. But I think that means that the top 10 names, we're eliminating 40% of them. So the top 10 names are now a top 6. And, I think if we take those 4 out, then we're down to voting on 16. And with ranked choice voting, it's not hard, it's not complicated. And some people have raised that it may be difficult to vote on that many names, but ranked choice voting makes it pretty clear what the favorites are. So
but we're voting now.
But I also want to clarify that as we strike these individual names, it was my assumption that when we strike Arcova, for example, that then we were adding James Brown. And when we struck Nick Austin, we were adding Greenway.
Right.
We struck Maggie Walker, we were adding Justice. That's how I voted.
Yeah, so the way it would work is if you strike Arcova and Nick Austin and Maggie Walker, then the names beneath it would all move up 1 spot. So
Matt?
Yeah.
This is Lynn. So my question would be, in terms of the quote unquote cutesy names. So just to ignore them, or should we just, since that's not what?
No, I think.
So Matt, we shouldn't automatically strike the names just on the public poll.
Okay.
so another reason why I think it's important to go with the 17 names instead of the 10 names, because we're automatic. Some people are saying we're automatically striking the last 10 names. I don't think that's correct.
So we should just move the next 3 up? That's
Yeah, so
right?
the fact
Okay.
is what we're doing is we're striking the top names within the top 10 and moving others in by default, which is sort of an accidental way to come up with the top 10 names. So that's why I'd rather vote for the top 16 if we're eliminating those 4.
Right, and I just want to make clear, and this is what I suggested earlier, cutting it from 20, or I guess now 17, down to 10, while the public poll is not determinative for the final vote for the working group, the idea was this would be in recognition of the public poll that there wasn't much widespread support for the names towards the bottom of the list.
I disagree. I disagree with that. Between 100 and 112 and 250, that's not a significant change. If those were 2 and 3 and 4 for those, that would be significant. The community, the equity, the harmony are all getting a significant number of votes, and those are just the public polling. Another reason I think it's important we vote for all 16 and not just 10.
Okay, well, since just to make sure we're all on the same page here, and I suggest maybe once everyone's clear on what we're doing here, we redo the vote. I see that people have been voting as we've been talking, but just so we're clear, what we'd be doing is we'd be removing Arcova, McCostin, and Maggie Walker, and then deciding whether we vote on the remaining 17 names on this list, the public poll, or the top 10 names in the public poll once you remove those 3 names. So we'd be calling the list based on the public poll, and then when you vote next week, use the public poll as you wish. So that, just to be clear, that's what we're doing. So with that, I think we should revote.
So Matt Dogwood stays in then?
I'm willing to hear other discussion. I think I agree with what you were saying, Mike. I think if we remove 4 of the top 10, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. And ultimately, you know, the county board will choose among the 5 names we send. If we send Dogwood as one of them, they may or may not choose it. But that's my opinion.
And we haven't voted to remove it yet. We haven't had a separate vote.
Correct.
I also, just to say that I think that part of my voting for keeping the top 10, in addition to the fact that there was, I think it was quite a significant drop off in votes towards the end, is the fact that I was really listening to the business community's feeling about those names that they called cute, many of which come towards the end. So I just wanted to say that for the reason why I would still just vote for the top 10 names. And it's easier, it makes it easier next week, and we're all more focused next week on names that we actually, maybe it's just my personal bias, but on names that I actually think are more appropriate.
Okay.
So to be clear, this isn't what the county board's going to see. If we leave it at 17 names for now, the county board theoretically is only going to see half of this list at the end of the day once we further refine it.
No. So just to remind you, the process for next week is at the end of tonight's meeting, we'll have the ballot ready. And the ballot will either be 10 names or 17 names. And then next week when we vote, we'll choose 1 preferred name and 4 alternative names. And then we'll send a total of 5 names to the county board. So when we send the final names to the county board, it'll be 5. So they won't see the whole list.
Okay.
They won't see the 1 preferred name and the 4 alternative names.
I'd just like to weigh in that I would recommend striking those 3. Ironically, if you strike 3, the name that goes in is Justice. If you strike Arcova, you put in Justice, which was also not liked by the business and landowners group and has a third of the vote.
I think we just deal with that.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. I vote, yeah.
I want to just weigh in real quick on that issue. You know, I understand the business community deemed a number of these names cute, and you know, from somebody who's not educated, even Loving could be one of those cute names. And I've lived in Arlington for more than 30 years, but I grew up in Montgomery County near Democracy Boulevard. Nobody there thinks it's cute. Everybody there thinks democracy is something that's real. I think the same way about justice or other things. I don't think they're transient. I think they're more enduring than, you know, many of the other names. So that's my personal opinion. I'm just weighing in to say, I don't want to let that one business advisory board have a huge impact and eliminate half of our names.
I agree with Mike.
I agree with what Mike was saying there. I would give not that much of a weight to the Matt's identification of them being cute. I think concepts are very, very important. So we don't have on this list, but it could be fearless or intrepid or other similar names. I personally think justice, unity, equality, and inclusive are perfectly fine names for a street or a highway. And as Mike was saying, I don't think they're considered cute. They're a little bit different because they're not named after a person. They're named, it's a concept. So I would, again, I'm going to advocate for having all 16 on the list. And I think it's not too many to handle in using the ranked choice voting method.
This is Sandy. I agree with Mike and with Mike, both on the concepts and on the having 16 or 17, whatever we decide.
This is Bill Braswell.
Yep.
I was wondering, Prince William this week accepted Richmond Highway as heading down one. And I wonder if we should give any thought to thinking that when we come up with 5 names for the county board, do we want to have in our thinking that we would like to see some parts of Virginia, hopefully all, latch onto it so that Route 29 is all one name someday. And the other thought is every time I look at number 11, James Brown, I always think James Brown is the grandfather of soul, but maybe y'all kids don't know all that kind of stuff.
You feel good.
That's so adorable.
Well, thank you, Bill. I agree. It would be nice if we could pick a name that had some regional applicability, recognizing the Washington Boulevard, Falls Church already renamed it Washington Street, but it is what it is. So looking at the chat, I see a strong preference for just narrowing it down to 10. So if anyone else hasn't voted yet, please do so. But I see a clear preference to cut it down to 10 names. All right, well, not seeing any other votes, it looks like we are going to cut it down to 10 from the 17 and move on from there. All right, next slide. All right, so the next question is, do we use the full name or just the last name? And this is particularly important for some of the name ideas for people. And the thinking here is that some of these names, it's going to be hard to see the full name on street signs along the corridor in the future. So for purposes of finalizing the ballot, do we want to just have a last name or the full name? So I think with that, I'll open it up to the group for discussion.
I think it's kind of name specific. I think John Glenn has to be John Glenn. Like, it just doesn't mean anything otherwise. But I do think, as much as I'm an advocate for Mildred and Richard Loving, I think that Loving works on its own. And similarly, I think that Edward T. Morton kind of needs to be Edward T. Morton, or again, it gets lost. So I think that I don't know that we can have a general rule. I think we kind of have to grind through it name by name.
I think that we should have the full name, because I think if we just have, Loving Boulevard, they're going to think it's Loving. They're not going to understand the historical reference. My personal opinion.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry that I had to be late tonight. I agree with Ms. Wilma that for the same reasons that you gave for John Glenn, it stands for all the names. And it's an important part of the story. I heard someone saying that maybe some people who voted thought Loving was cute. I mean, that even gives more to the point for that example, why we want to be able to tell the story with the full name.
I'd like to add my voice to that and say, yes, I agree. Full names, how it's actually spelled out on the sign can be debated, but Mildred and Richard Loving would be a wonderful addition to this community.
Yeah, and I think just to add some clarity too, I think is, if we went with full names, it would probably be in the history books or formal government documents would be the full name, and what it ends up being on the street sign, I think will just depend on the name and depend on the county's desire to have the full name or the short name on it.
Right. Yeah, so, if I can just add, I agree, Matt, that there is the official name and then there's the name that people call it every day. And I think my bias has been clear from the beginning. I think it should be Mildred and Richard Loving for that particular name, that it should be the full name, and that I'm sure the county can deal with how to make all that fit on a street sign. And I think the businesses can deal with how to play with the name in order to make it friendly and to make it business friendly and everything else. But I think historically, because Loving has a meaning apart from the name of a couple of people, it's really important that the whole name be there. Otherwise, in a generation to come, people are not going to remember that it's named after these two particular people, and it would just be Loving Lane, Lovers Lane. It can very quickly degenerate into something that we don't mean it to be. So just to support the fact that I really think it should be the full name. And there had been a few other comments about maybe just calling it Mildred Loving, which I also wanted to, to say that I really think that it should be both of them, Mildred and Richard, because that was the whole point. That is why they're important, because they're a couple who wanted to stay together as a couple.
Can I add to? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to add to the conversation because I've been the person receiving all of the comments from the public. There has been a lot of support for the name Loving, but a lot of those folks do not like the idea of using the full name, strictly because it's too long. Whether it's the official name and then on the street signs it just says Loving, that's a possibility. But I do think that is something to consider. That's Mildred and Richard Loving, while a lovely idea, is quite a long name for a street. And while I do agree that it's possible that just using the name Loving could maybe get lost, that it's the Lovings over time, I do, just as a devil's advocate, Lee Highway, everyone knows which Lee that name is associated with. So I think if we do a good job with our marketing and our branding, people will know, if we choose the name just Loving, people will know to whom that refers to.
Were you suggesting Lovings, plural, to represent them both?
I think the Lovings or something like that, if you're going
I think that
without
works.
their first name.
I'm not sure if that's what you were suggesting, but I heard that in what you were saying and actually like that.
Didn't officially do it, but it is a nice idea.
Yeah, I think that because then that would make people understand, or at least to question, why is it that? Because Loving just makes me think it means loving.
Can I interject? I'm sorry. Ms. Wilma, I'm sorry, Matt. This is Lynn Coates. And I think, just for a technical issue, I think when Lauren Harris speaks, my name comes up. So I just want to, for whomever's doing the notes, so that they'll know that it's Lauren speaking and not me. Well, now I'm speaking, but she was speaking earlier. So just so that we can clarify for the minutes. But I agree with Monet in terms of, and Ms. Wilma, in terms of, well, I think that the whole purpose of us doing this is the fact that we're educating our community. And so in terms of marketing, I think that's not what we're charged to do. So I don't know if we should be trying to solve that problem, the marketing problem, because that's, you know, that's not, I don't think that's what our charge is, but I think the Mildred and Richard Loving is a really powerful name, so that needs to be full.
I agree with Lynn.
I love the idea of including Mildred and Richard Loving because I think that does help to clarify things. However, I think from a pragmatic standpoint, it will naturally be shortened to Loving when people are using it. So we do have to make sure that we're aware that regardless of what our intent might be, the actual user standpoint of things will shorten it naturally, just because the term Mildred and Richard Loving is a very long term. And as much as, you know, we might want to say like, hey, we're not marketers, I think looking at every single bit of criteria around the selection of these names is essentially part of our design brief. You know, but it's one of the things that just goes into the street. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage that we kind of ignore certain things because they're not necessarily convenient. It is unfortunately just something that we have to face. I do love the idea of Lovings, just because it threads that needle between, you know, kind of asking the question in the user's mind of who exactly Loving is, but it doesn't necessarily have that length that could potentially, and, you know, I'd hate to say, hey, we love Mildred and Richard Loving so much, but then we're kind of dooming that particular name to failure just because we insist on keeping it long. Loving's, from my perspective, and I'd venture to guess the rest of the business community's perspective, is a very kind of pragmatic way of hitting that middle ground between something that doesn't sound like a concept and does indeed sound like the historic folks that it represents.
Can I interject again? This is Jim. I'm sorry. This is Jim. Will someone else go first, and I can come again if you want to go.
I just wanted to add to just a little bit to respond to what Matt Rowan is saying, which is that it reminds me of Key Bridge, for example. We all know it as Key Bridge, but when you get there, it says on the sign Francis Scott Key Bridge, which and the fact that we all call it Key Bridge, I think, is fine. But it does mean that when people are the least bit curious about what is this name, and they go there and there is a sign that says Francis Scott Key, so we know exactly who it is. And I envisioned the same thing for Mildred and Richard Loving. We'll all call it Loving Boulevard or Loving Lane or whatever it is that we want to call it. But when people go there, they see what it is and they'll know, to me, you know, they will know what it is. So to me, I don't think that the two things are not, I don't think it weakens a name to have the full name there. I think it gives a name a certain dignity to have both names there so that we know the historical context in which it is put there. And the fact that people always refer to it as Loving Boulevard, I think is fine. Just like we say Key Bridge, but it doesn't mean that we don't all know that it's Francis Scott Key Bridge, because you can see that when you get there.
And I think that's a great point, Minnie. The point I wanted to raise is that we should start to think about what whether this is going to be a street or a boulevard or a way, because when we talk about Washington Boulevard, we all say both words, and that's 6 syllables. But if we did have Mildred and Richard Loving, you wouldn't actually need to say anything else. Like, you just say take a left on Mildred and Richard Loving, or take a left on Loving. But you don't necessarily have to say Boulevard. And certainly if we do use Mildred and Richard Loving, I recommend that we go with street to minimize the additional number of syllables that we are adding here. But we do the same thing with GW Parkway, right? Everyone shortens George Washington Parkway, which again
Memorial
is
Parkway. George Washington Memorial
Parkway, right? So
yeah.
that's 8 syllables, and everyone shortens it to GW Parkway, which is still 4 syllables. But I think that you know, that some of these names lend themselves to a longer, like John Glenn to me lends itself as John Glenn Boulevard. But Mildred and Richard Loving, I think, lends itself to a very short name. But I also think that yes, people will just call it Loving or Loving Street. But if you also just say take a left on Mildred and Richard Loving, everyone will know what that is. And I do think that it could get used as long as we don't further encumber it with a really long avenue or boulevard afterwards.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. This is Lynn. And I think if you look at Leonard Dock Muse, I mean, that to me would be, could go many ways. Dock Boulevard, Dock, you know, I mean, that's a Leonard Dock Muse, that's a long name, but it could be easily Dock Boulevard. So.
And that's not in the top 10.
Oh, I just looked
this is Anika. I have a question about the question of should the ballot include the full names? Like, we're being asked this for a specific reason, and I want to go back to Matt Rowan's query, like the fact that it might be thrown out because a name might be thrown out because it's not seen as desirable from a marketing or whatever point of view. Like, do we need to be strategic about the choices to ensure their safety and inclusion? I mean, clearly Loving came up strongly. It's come up strong. It seems it's bubbling up as something strong for us. How do we position it to be a strong contender? That and any other name for that matter. And I think that's what we, you know, want to put our heads around if we think, if the understanding is things could be thrown out if they're not sort of strategically phrased and so on.
So what I'm hearing is everybody is concerned about syntax, and there's a huge amount of just nostalgia and emotion in the group about one specific name that's just really long if you put the whole family in that street sign. I suggest we just push it forward. Maybe it has an AKA, like maybe it's MRL, or maybe it's Loving's Lane on the sign, and when you get close to it, there's a big plaque and it says Mildred and Richard Loving Lane, and it explains the whole family, and there's more context similar to Key Bridge and Georgetown, walking across there. I feel like if everybody's really passionate about something that should inspire passion, as it does for me, I think the conversation might be more productive if we say, like, how can we make this, you know, like more syntax proof? And maybe I think that's already what we're saying, but like, you know, trying to pin it down.
This is Sandra. I agree with Mine. I think we should leave it Mildred and Richard Loving. That's who this is intended to honor. And just like George Washington Memorial Parkway and Francis Scott Key, people are going to shorten whatever they're going to shorten, and that's okay. But I think when they look at the sign, it should be technically Mildred and Richard Loving. And it's okay for people to reduce it to a shorter name, you know, in the scheme of things. But I really think it should be the whole name.
Agree. I agree.
I just want to make one brief comment to that. I agree. However, I would just like to make, I think it's important to point out the difference between the Key Bridge and the Parkway. You know, what will be the new name for Lee Highway is the name for a major road with lots of businesses. And in my opinion, that's very different from a major parkway or a bridge. It's a more communal area. And whether or not technically it's in our charge to do this, although I would argue that it is because it was part of our criteria. I do think that marketing and branding is something that is important to go into our decision. You know, for the survival of our businesses, for how we want this community to be presented. I would argue that I think that is something important to consider when making this decision.
So can I make a suggestion? Since we have to narrow this down, can we make a suggestion to put on the ballot the full names, and then if it gets picked as one of the names that go forward, we have this conversation then?
Yeah.
Good idea.
That's a great idea.
Because I
Mr.
think it's a
Chairman,
waste of time if
the
it's not one of
question
the
that we
ones
vote
that's picked.
on using full names on the ballot.
I second that.
Second.
I
Okay.
agree.
I agree.
All right, well, everyone,
I agree.
do you want to have a vote in the chat, or does it sound like everyone's on the same page about Wilma's idea, which is full name, and then if we choose one of these names as the preferred name, or the alternatives, at that point, we address whether it's going to be short or long.
Yeah.
I agree.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Great.
Agreed.
Right, and then Katie, I think, would be willing to give a little context, at least how she would view this issue as a board member, recognizing she can't speak for the other four. So if Katie, if you want to jump in.
Matt, thank you. I mean, I think this discussion's been really instructive. I just, you've heard me say this before, you've heard Matt say it before, but our next steps on the process would be to see if we can seek some regional consensus, particularly, you know, with Fairfax as our biggest neighbor that shares the highway. You know, if we were to find ourselves with the legislative authority to rename it as Arlington County, I think you can imagine what would be next would be a public hearing, for example, at the county board level. I share both of those things just to say, you know, there sort of will be a next step. And there will also be, you know, multiple very boring conversations with VDOT about road sign typologies, you know, and this square footage on the different signs and so forth. And so I think what I would find really helpful, and I suspect I can speak for my colleagues on this, is to know this group's recommendations and preferences for the sort of full name and how you know, it might be included on street signs, et cetera. But also if you could extend the county board and, you know, potentially VDOT, the CTB, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the General Assembly, a little flexibility, recognizing that there may be some adjustments to reality of things like the standardized VDOT street signs and or what regional partners may wish to see.
Thank you, Katie. That's super helpful. And I think that kind of reinforces what Wilma was saying, and what sounds like the will of the working group, which is to move forward with these full names and then have further discussions next week. And then obviously further down the process, VDOT, the county board, CTP, the General Assembly, whomever will be discussing these things at length, I'm sure. All right. Well, here, it sounds like everyone more or less agrees with that. So I think we're ready to move on to the last issue for the ballot, which is what road typology should go with each name. We all sent you the video from Vox, which I thought did a pretty helpful job of explaining the different types of road typologies and how they are typically used. I think consistent with the, you know, the way Plainly Highway or Plan whatever the road may be in the future wants to really enhance really wants to put forward a walkable, livable community that's, you know, is really inviting. Obviously, highway isn't going to work, and I think the thinking is that Avenue, Boulevard, and Street would make the most sense. And the definitions for these types of street typologies, which this is not written in stone, this is from the Vox article itself. I couldn't find the actual VDOT definitions if they exist anywhere. But we're looking mostly Avenue, Boulevard, and Street. Avenue being a public way, often in a city, usually with trees or buildings on the side. It frequently runs perpendicular to a street. Boulevard, a large, wide street with trees on both sides, unless it's Arlington Boulevard.
Or Washington Boulevard.
Or Washington Boulevard. Often there's a median with trees. And then street, a public way with buildings on both sides. Often it runs perpendicular to an avenue. All right, next slide. So the question here is, and I think we have to do some editing in real time to get rid of the names that didn't make the final cut. It sounds like, based on our prior discussion earlier tonight, we should go through these names individually and decide the appropriate typology for each name, rather than having a blanket statement like all the finalists will be referred to as avenue or street or boulevard. Does that sound like what I was hearing?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Could I also comment that I thought, as helpful as the Vox article was, I don't think it sort of applies in Arlington, and I don't think it, or in Washington, D.C. In D.C., there are almost, I can't think of any boulevards, but there's a ton of avenues, right? All the streets are avenues. But then one of the other really big streets in D.C. is K Street. And so, and I also, in Arlington, I think avenue only gets used when there's like first a 20th Street North, then a 20th Road North, and then a 20th Avenue North, or 21st Avenue North, or whatever. So avenues, I think, in Arlington are used kind of only as an auxiliary name when there's sort of an extra street to be squeezed in.
This is
And
renaming
so-
Lee Highway. Here, you want to see it? See the names? Come here.
Sorry, Jim, Mike Hogan here. I think that I agree with you that, those were broad general conventions, but by no means rules that we should use to limit our choices. To me, this is a limiting function of our creativity, and to narrow it down to just 3 secondary monikers is, maybe a mistake. It just limits what we can do. I think names like Gateway or Parkway or other things are more welcoming and more friendly sounding towards the type of corridor we want to build than street or avenue or boulevard. So Matt, I know you want to make this simple, and I'm probably not helping in that regard, but I think we should be a little creative and come up with the best name possible rather than the easiest name possible.
And I had one more thing to say. Someone else jumped in there for a minute by accident, but we also have Old Dominion Drive, and of course part of 29 is currently a drive, and that could be in another name I think we should consider. And then of course I just want to emphasize that for some reason we haven't mentioned road, but road can also be a big, certainly an equal name to a street, and lots of things are roads, although maybe not in Arlington.
And I think one thing that I might also kind of add in here is, as much as I might be advocating for simplicity, I think there's a level to which we can make selections based upon what seems to go together the most to roll off the tongue. That will also help to encourage memorability, which is, frankly, one of the things that's driving simplicity as well. The more memorable and the more poetic it seems to feel, the better. And I will say, kind of from my prior life, which did include kind of road naming exercises, some of the originating kind of typologies of the roads might have really related to prior naming conventions, but right now it's a little bit of a free-for-all just out there as far as where road naming goes. So I think what that means is we do have latitude to assign the road typology based upon what sounds the best or what might go together the best from a conceptual standpoint.
Looking at VDOT's guidelines for urban collectors and arterals and things like that, boulevard, avenue, and local street are sort of like the standards, and then up on the scale it goes to interstate or freeway. So if you say that you're a boulevard or you say you're an avenue, you're coming at a very specific thing from a just old school design standpoint from VDOT and the state of Virginia's perspective. I think if you wanted to say Loving Lane, or if you wanted to say something else, there's no real regulation that I can see looking through VDOT's guidelines that would really force you to pick something. But if you pick boulevard, that's faster than an avenue, and an avenue is faster than a street, and a street is faster than a road, which Lee Highway is definitely not going to become a road. I think, just in terms of the technical information I'm finding. That's the quick just a quick.
Thanks,
filter.
Ben. Sandy, not to put you in the hot spot, do you want to talk about your thoughts on this? I know this is related to Plainly Highway and placemaking and your thoughts on that.
With regard to Avenue, Boulevard, or
Yeah.
street, or?
Yeah, with regard to those names or opening it up to any other type of street type apology, or how this all relates to the planning effort in your view.
Yeah, well, personally, I do think that what Ben just said, I mean, I do think we need to be creative, but we also, this is a VDOT road or a VDOT highway at this point. So I probably would try to stick to Avenue, Boulevard, or street. You know, the VDOT functional classifications are by mileage. So all three of those types of roadways are by mileage, basically 25 to 30, 25 to 35 miles an hour, which is what I think we're hoping to get Lee Highway down to perhaps. But I think that, you know, from a marketing perspective, although I love alliteration, I love the idea of loving lane, I don't think this is a lane. I mean, there is a very distinctive definition usually in typologies for lane. It's a small roadway. So I guess I would recommend Avenue, Boulevard, or street. I mean, words like Main Street, that's already there. I do think there's a wonderful connotation of avenue that has to do with retail a little bit. And I think Boulevard does bring up tree-lined streets, etc. So my recommendation would be that we try to stick to the three that I think VDOT would look favorably upon, and I think they also work well for businesses.
I'll make one last push for Drive because it's short and we have Old Dominion Drive that goes through downtown McLean.
Just to clarify, so Main Street is there. Does that mean that that would automatically be street, or it would be Main Street Avenue?
No, it would be Main Street.
Street. And that would same Greenway. It would just be Greenway.
It would just be Greenway. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah.
I think that other than those two, like, I think Avenue is really strong. I love Lane because how, like you said, it waxes poetic, but other than that, it does feel like a smaller jurisdiction. And for what you all beautifully shared about the plans for Lee Highway, the area and the 4 nodes, business nodes, or 5, I can't recall. Sorry that I'm not getting it correctly, but that really stood out for me. And, you know, there's a vision for that, and wanting to honor that. Street feels very flat to me, but Avenue, you know, feels alive and feels connected to business and vitality and growth.
Agreed. Well, and I might also add, I would say that Lane seems a little rural. And I think the one thing that we do want to keep in mind is if we have visitors that are actually visiting this site or this particular road, and we're giving them just a name before they have any other information, I do like to try to at least figure out what that name would evoke in their minds and what level of expectation they might have. So if we do have the words Avenue, that is a very different expectation or a mental picture that people would have than Lane. So just my 2 cents.
Well, Matt, Mike Hogan here, and I'll say this and shut up. But I think we're limiting our creativity and we're limiting our placemaking by choosing just from 3 options. I think if you think about the word promenade or gateway or parkway, those, are not commonly used in our area, but they evoke different meanings of walkability, of shoppability, of those types of things. If we just go with street, Avenue and Boulevard, we're limiting our creativity, and that's all I'll say about that.
This is Jeff. I'll second Mike's point, and this is an opportunity to be creative, to create a different sense of community. We're already tearing down one sort of legacy here. Why not? Why be then constrained by another set of constrictions?
All right. So maybe an idea that I have is we, not to kick another issue, kick the can down the road on another issue, but for the purpose of the ballot, we would just have the name like Dogwood, Edward T. Morton, Ella Baker, and so on. And then once we have the vote next week, and we see what the preferred name and the 4 alternative names are, then we would go through those and say, okay, for this preferred name, is it Avenue, Boulevard, Esplanade, whatever, and come up with the name then. Recognizing
that's
that,
sense.
That's a great move.
Okay.
I agree, Matt.
Okay, so let's plan on doing that. And I think in the interim, we'll send an email to the working group with, I'm sure there's some website online that has a full list of all the different road typologies. And we will send those to everyone. So you can, my ask of you is to look at the road typologies and think how they may or may not work with certain names before you vote next week. So when we get to that point after we vote and we have the final 5, we're ready to fully discuss what street typology should go with those names.
Matt, before we, could we take a next step of asking someone knowledgeable to give DES, the transportation people, a call and see if there are any Virginia restrictions or Arlington restrictions on how streets are named, so that we don't run up against a roadblock at the last minute.
Yeah, we can ask VDOT, Bill.
Typically, east-west roads like this are named boulevards in Arlington. It's in there. It's in Arlington's guidance.
Yeah, let's just find out, because I don't think all of them are really going to be suitable for Boulevard, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a little bit of homework to do between now and next Tuesday. And in the interim, we'll send you a list of all the possible road typologies we could use. And then once we choose the final 5, we'll, at that point, pick the road typology for that name. All right, well, I think if it sounds like everyone pretty much agrees on that.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. At this point, it's almost 8 o'clock. We have a half hour to go. We wanted to use this component of the meeting to really talk about, have people just talk about the names they like and what their thoughts are, and what your thoughts are on how we got here and what the names mean to you. By all means, it doesn't have to take another 30 minutes, but it's all we have for this meeting. So with that, I'll open it up.
I have to go early. I was late and I have to go early, so apologies. I'll just quickly say, when I look at these names and that they made the top 10, I feel super excited. I remember when we had the subcommittee meeting not too many weeks ago, and spending that day, I was actually on the road, but spending that day with everyone and going through the names, that these feel good. And even in talking with folks in the community, like hearing, oh, Loving, like that there's resonance. And I felt so concerned that there might be a disconnect between where what we were feeling and what community might feel. And, that we might be in a situation where we really were not aligned with community was a definite concern with me. And to see that we are really have strong names that, all of them could actually stand for different reasons for the most part. So I just feel really positive about it. I'm super excited to see like Ella Baker as well and the Lovings. It's just super exciting.
And this is Diane. I also have to run, but if I can just say, I had submitted the Lovings names because we originally had talked about how we could extend this into other counties in Virginia. I think that the Loving case is very important for the state of Virginia, but even more important for every American. So I think every name we have is well worth having, but I know that when the time comes, everybody will find the right name. So it's been a great effort.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, Wilma, that's okay. I'm done.
And I need to leave as well, but I just wanted to say that I agree with everyone. I'm very proud to be a part of this group and look at the names. And I think that even if, you know, the fact, I let me just speak, you know, I'm gonna take my John M. Langston hat off. I'm gonna speak as Wilma. The fact that there are 3 names on this top 10 list that recognize the importance of the community that I live in and that what made such a difference in Arlington is really important. And I do also want to co-sign the whole Mildred and Richard Loving, and the fact that that could be something that could be accepted by a large part of the different jurisdictions that are on the highway, because of the fact that what they did is, you know, to be very honest with you, is what is playing out in terms of the changes and the things that are happening in this country, because, you know, you can love whoever you want to love. So I think that all of these names really make a difference, but I think that, you know, those 4 are really special to me. And I'm going to put this out in our community and let everybody in our neighborhood know what we've done. I think this is a great thing.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. This is Lynn, if I can interject.
Sure.
Thanks. I will try to be really brief and quick. This was a wonderful exercise that we've gone through. I think it's really, really important and historic. And two of my favorites were, of course, the Lovings. To echo what Ms. Wilman said, it reflects of what this country needs right now is acceptance and inclusion. And Ella Baker, for me, was important because of the power of the vote, how powerful the work that she has done. So I think that we have done a really, really monumental feat here. And I'm really proud of being in this group. And that's it. Just very, very, very humbly honored.
This is Sandra, and I wanted to say that I thought that the process that Matt used, and Matt as a facilitator, made this what it was.
Yes.
I think that he chaired all of the meetings in a manner that he moved us forward every week. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
This is Tom Wolf. Let me jump in and say thank you to everybody in the group. I've learned a lot. Again, I'm a resident of Lee Highway. I'm the guy who has to write the name of the street on every communication I send out through the mail. And let me, for the record, say I apologize for missing the last meeting, but I was putting in a 10-hour day as a seasonal employee of the Arlington Office of Voter Registration. And I'm sure the committee chairman will give me that, excuse me for that absence.
Yeah, well, thanks for your help there, Tom. I know it was a crazy election too.
It was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience and well done. Let me just say I've learned a lot from all these discussions, and I have not decided how I'm going to vote or for what name I'm going to vote for. But again, I've got to write this down on, on all of my communications. But let me pose a question, and forgive me. I scrutinized the minutes from the last meeting that I missed. I don't know if it's been discussed, but if it comes down to a name, have the family members, if there are any or descendants of any of these names, should it come to that, been consulted about whether or not they would look favorably upon their family member having a road named after their descendant. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, and on with the discussion.
Well, I also want to express my appreciation for this group. I think that I've learned a lot just being with all of you, and I really appreciate the fact that there was so much, especially in the history of Arlington and the history of African Americans in Arlington, some of which I really didn't know, even though I've lived in Arlington for going on 33 years now. So it was really wonderful for me to learn that. I love the name Mildred and Richard Loving. I don't think it's a surprise to any of you. I also like the name Morton and the Doc Muse, and I still hope to one day go on the walking tour of the history of Black Arlington along Lee Highway. And I hope that if those names, Morton and Doc Muse, are not chosen, we can still do something that is going to increase people's knowledge of the history behind this really important community that lived there. And yes, I also want to commend Matt. I think this has been really well run. We started off with an incredibly difficult job to do, but I think you managed to get us organized and somehow able to do this very messy job and to do it in a way that feels very manageable now. And I think that we'll be able to actually come up with some pretty good options to get to the county. So thank you, everybody.
This is Julius. I must say I echo everything that my colleagues have said thus far. But I'll also say that I believe my, Mildred Loving stands out to me. I think just because of the background and the civil rights movement back in the 60s and what they went through. So as president of NAACP, it brings me great pride to see that that name is up there. So I also like Justice, but I think we're at a point right now where any of these top 10 will be suitable. But the process, again, Matt, you've done an outstanding job managing this process, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I enjoyed it.
This is Richard Price. I want to just quickly say thank you to everybody also on the group. I think everybody, kudos to the entire working group for the fantastic job that has been done. I mean, getting the list to where it started to what it is right now. I think the 10 names that are on this list, I think there's something to like. I think there's something to love about every single one of those names. Not everybody's going to get everything. We're going to get something out of this. This was a monumental task brought down to a very, very manageable task. And now we have our job to come up with one name we all would agree on, and as well as 4 alternates. I think that's going to be a great discussion next week. I appreciate all the leadership of the Lee Highway Alliance to help us bring us to this point. And thanks again, everybody, for a great job. I think this list is going to be, I think next week's going to be a fantastic discussion.
I'd just like to weigh in for a second. I'd like to also say thank you for everyone for making this such an enjoyable process. That's not always the case with community engagement. This has been a wonderful group. And I am proud of all of the names that are in the top 10. I do want to speak, several of the names I adore, but one that I'd like to highlight is John M. Langston. Having listened to all of the different advisory groups and the working group and understanding what's important to lots of folks, I do think that John M. Langston has a local connection. It has a historical perspective, first African-American congressman. And I think the name is a nice name for the corridor. Langston sounds like poetry. So I just wanted to put that on and speak out on behalf. But many of the other names are wonderful too.
Hi, this is Jim again, and I know I've spoken a lot both tonight and other meetings, and thank you everyone for enduring so much of that. You're all so wonderful. I have learned so much. I love the process, and it's made me come to like names that I didn't originally think I would like. I first came to this thinking, well, we just need some streets named after women. I'm glad there's still 2 women's names left on the list. I wish that we could actually find a way to use all these names in some part of Arlington, even if we can't use them on Route 29. And so I will just leave it with the thought of maybe this is a good chance to use name a road after a woman. I think that both Mildred and Ella Baker would be wonderful people to name a road after. And who knows, maybe if we don't select their names, they could be contenders for the short section of Lee Highway that runs through Waverly Hills and Cherrydale that we will later rename.
Well said. This is Ben Keeney, and I gotta echo everything I've heard tonight. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this project, and I think this is something that's just earth-shattering. When I first moved to Arlington, I would come around the holidays, Christmas, and I would back in the days when people used to write cards, I would struggle with the address where I was sending my Christmas cards from, because I was a little bit not comfortable saying, you know, I'm living on 555 Lee Highway or whatnot. So I think this is the thing where this is finally the opportunity where I think as a group we can change that. And I won't need to send Christmas cards from Georgetown or wherever else anymore and have that DC address and, you know, do the work email or whatever. But I think, you know, when I look at this whole conversation, again, I've learned a lot. I didn't really know who the Lovings were when I came into this work group, and I have picked up quite a bit. And I think that, you know, my wife and I wouldn't be married right now legally if it wasn't for the Lovings. And I think that's something that's kind of a big deal for me. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of names on this list that truly touch my heart. I'm happy with all of them, but I know who my favorite is. So thank you all.
I'd just like to say that it's been really wonderful. You know, most of you know that I own businesses on Lee Highway. And when I first started 9 years ago, I too felt that same kind of heart palpitations Ben's talking about when you have to add your business with a Lee Highway address. And then understanding from Sandra and different of our other communications of just the sheer history that's been on the highway for African Americans and particularly where my buildings are and what that meant. And so I'm excited to, I'm so glad this process has been so great, and I think it's been so seamless, really, the whole process the whole way through, and we've really listened to each other and really taken a lot of different opinions into consideration. And I think that's just a wonderful thing. And so I thank you guys for being so great.
All right, anyone else with the good of the cause?
Matt?
Yep, Sandy, sure.
Yep. So I want to also say I'm very grateful to all of you for participating in this. Our strategy, as you know, as LHA has been to strengthen awareness and motivate participation and foster cooperation. And I think this has been accomplished through your rules and criteria and the polling, all of which are consistent with LHA's values. We've reached thousands of stakeholders, which is sort of amazing in and of itself. Whatever is chosen, I think LHA should work with the communities to continue to deploy information on our heritage and the runner-up names. I personally believe we should probably try to have a heritage museum, a lot of Black heritage exhibits, school programs. Some of these names might be on plazas and buildings with interpretive signage. We could have community events such as a mural festival. All of us have learned a lot about Doc Morton, Doc Muse, Reverend Brown, Ella Baker, Maggie Walker, John Langston, and of course the Lovings. And we should share this information for a very long time. I am also here representing Plan Lee Highway. So I don't know what I'm going to vote for, but I did want to say that the name Main Street, I think also is a very good name. Plan Lee Highway is all about creating a main street that runs through all of our 14 corridor communities. Unlike most cities, Arlington does not have a main street. And I think it offers great branding with immediate connotations of friendly, familiar, tree-lined, walkable streets and robust retail and hopefully jobs. And it can link to things like Main Street Square or the shops on Main, etc. It represents the entire corridor of neighborhoods. It's easy to spell, remember, timeless, not cute, and provides a sense of place and prosperity. So I don't know which I'll vote for, but thank you all for participating in this process.
I just want to come back again, and I just want to shout out and honor and thank Miss Sandra and Miss Wilma. I don't know that this experience would have been quite the same for me without your rich knowledge of the history of Arlington. I got chills many times when you all were speaking, and so thank you for teaching me so much.
Welcome.
This is Jeff. So first I want to follow up, and it's been an incredible experience to be able to hear from people and participate with people who have such rich history and can provide such a first-person and historic and personal perspective on this important issue. So that first, second, thanks to the Alliance and to Matt and to everyone. Great job in leading us. Public policy making of any sort is always messy, and certainly when it's communal like this. But it's been a phenomenal experience, and to see the passion and the creativity and the good thinking and I think the willingness to listen to each other in these times when that's becomes more and more of a commodity. It seems at times that it is wonderful to be an experience where we actually listen to each other and we're respectful. We all seem to be cheering a little bit for our favorites, even though they're all good. I'll say they're all good, but there is something special and unique about Loving. It's a phenomenal story. It's a timeless story. It's a story that's changed our nation. It's a story that unlike some of the others are unique not only to Arlington but to Virginia itself, but have resonance across not only the nation but the world. I get that there may be names that are more business friendly or resonate in that way, but it is what you make it. And if the community works to make whatever name we choose to become sort of a main street or a place of community or a place of business, then it becomes what it is. So it's not just about the name; it's about what we put into it and how we market it and sell it. And then the last thing I'll say is I completely agree with Sandy on this has become sort of my one horse pony over the last couple of meetings, but let's not miss an opportunity to tell this great story. And I know it hasn't been part of our charter, but I think the county, if we don't, there's such a rich, phenomenal history we have to tell. And if we don't find a creative way to do that, then we sort of, then the point that the original reason to come together and do this is sort of missed, right? If we don't tell that larger story and honor the history along the corridor or lane or street or boulevard or avenue or whatever we end up calling it. So I encourage those who continue on to find a way to, whether it's a museum or tours or whatever it is, to be creative in honoring that history. But thanks again. Thanks for letting me participate. It was great.
I associate myself with the comments of my friend Jeff. And at the risk of everything being said, but not everyone having said it, I think that the names that we have, we can't lose. And I have some favorites. I'm not sure how I would vote, but Lovings are right at the top. And I want to thank Matt. You've done a great job, and everybody, thanks for your help. This has been a great experience in the Arlington way.
I'll just jump in and add another facet to the appreciation and gratitude that's going around. As a small business owner along the corridor, to have been included in the process is a great honor. And also the nature of my business, which is yoga and meditation and mindfulness, that it's a great testament to what can happen on a public policy level when we employ these qualities of clarity and close attention, being grounded and operating together with compassion and kindness and equanimity, and it's a beautiful thing.
Thank you, Annie. Anyone else?
I'd just like to express my gratitude to everyone here in the working group, and especially Matt for chairing this great working group. I think a lot of the names are great. Kind of at the top of my list is Lovings and Main Street. Those are my kind of top of my list, but I would be comfortable with any of the names on the list. I do want to share, I spent 2 hours of my day yesterday watching the movie The Lovings, which is a fantastic movie. So if you haven't watched it yet, I really recommend. I learned so much, even though it was a drama. It was really well done, and I encourage everybody else to watch it.
Thanks, Mike. All right, anyone else?
To adjourn?
Sure, I'll just say real fast, I enjoyed working with all of you, and obviously this process had the potential to be a little controversial, to say the least, but I think we worked extremely well together, and that's a testament to everything you guys did. I was impressed every single meeting that people had suggestions to improve the process and move the ball forward, and there were many opportunities for us to get stuck in the weeds and really not be as forward thinking as we could have been. But you guys did a fantastic job, and I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. So I think I'm excited to see how the vote goes next week. I see my role as a facilitator, so I'm not going to tell you my favorite names. But I think next Tuesday should be a fun night, and just be on the lookout for the instructions for the ranked choice voting. I'm working with Mike later this week on putting the ballot together, and then we'll follow up as well with street typologies. So you have that information, and we'll wrap this all up. And I haven't lived in this community as long as most of you have, and I've learned so much. I've lived here for 8 years, give or take, but I've learned so much from all of you about the history of the corridor, the history of Arlington, and all the stories that can be told about this neighborhood. And I will also say that as my great-great-great-grandfather died in the Battle of Darbytown Road at the hands of Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. So this was an interesting opportunity to to respond in a way, I guess. I really did enjoy the process, and I think we've done a great job. So look forward to wrapping this up next week.
So should we name it Matt's Revenge?
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.